Welcome to the Nemeth Report podcast. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth, energy historian, analyst, and consultant. I'll be your host. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Meredith Angwin. I'm so happy she's able to talk to me today. She's better known as the Electric Grandma. Stu Turley, my podcasting partner on Energy Reality, says she's a national treasure. I agree. She's the author of Shorting the Grid, and she's here to discuss what's going on with grid stability these days. Hi, Meredith. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Tammy. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we begin, can you just take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience? What's your background? What was your motivation for writing about the grid?
Well, my background was I always wanted to be a scientist, so I became a chemist, and I began doing work with utilities and corrosion control. And basically, I found myself doing work in geothermal and nuclear and even in fossil with nitrogen oxide control. And so at any rate, I was just sort of all around the utility scene doing chemistry. When I retired, I had come to the conclusion that nuclear was really good and it got a bad rap. I had worked in nuclear also in corrosion control. And I joined a group that was defending a Vermont Yankee. And by joining the group that was defending Vermont Yankee, I began to see the interactions of the Vermont Yankee nuclear plant with the grid and what happened with this and what FERC said about that. And the trouble is that if I tried to explain it to regular people, it was a morass. I could explain why nuclear is good in like 2-3 sentences, but explaining what happened on the grid was like, so I decided I'd write a book. That's what I did, because that way I could refer to things that I said, well, as I said in chapter 4 or whatever, as opposed to being like long-winded about trying to explain everything at once.
Yeah, this is what I love so much about your book is that you break it down in such a succinct manner, in a very logical way, where there's like little bits and then you move on to the next bit and the next bit. Very scientific. Must be the the chemist science training there, where it's all kind of linked together like molecules. But it's such a great read to understand. Like, I didn't know very much about the grid. It seemed really rather arcane. Like, as you say, it always seemed rather complex, but you just did such a brilliant job in explaining it in a really understandable way. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I worked at doing that. I didn't want it to be something that nobody would read. I mean, I was putting too much time into it to have it only read by electrical engineers. So I really enjoyed doing it. I didn't really enjoy it because the thing is that I would write something, then I would check it, then I would check it with a subject matter expert in that particular area, then I would rewrite it. So it took a long time. I mean, there's a saying that easy reading is slow writing, and I think that's true.
Very true. So for the audience who maybe haven't read your book, although I suspect many of the people who will be listening to this have read it, can you just give us a brief overview? What is the hidden fragility of our electric grid? Because that's one of the things you talk about is the hidden fragility. And if you could just maybe give a brief summary or overview of what you communicate in the book.
Well, the grid used to be a kind of simple. Things weren't as hidden. Right now, the fragility is due to the fact that there's no place where the buck stops. In other words, if the grid isn't reliable, if it's having rolling blackouts and stuff, whose fault is it? I mean, whose fault is it? It's not so I can blame somebody, but how we can fix something. But if you don't know how it got that way, because it's so complicated, And that's what was the hidden fragility. The hidden fragility is that, for example, if you're in a RTO area, which is regional transmission organization area, the regional transmission organization is more or less responsible for power plants being paid, but the states are responsible for power plants being allowed to be built, and so they could say yes, let's build it, and then it turns out that according to the RTO rules, they're not getting paid enough to build it. I mean, it is really, so whose fault is that? Is that the RTO's fault? The state's fault? Why isn't that plant being built? So that is part of the problem. And after I wrote the book, I kept trying to refine the problem more and more to make it simpler, because really complexity is part of the problem. In other words, the buck doesn't stop anywhere, because everything that would stop the buck is very complex and has layers and layers. And you want to look at what the RTO says and what FERC says and what the Public Utility Commission in the state says, and pretty soon you're just going in a little circle.
Right. And then who's explaining what to the people, and people don't understand, well, why am I getting these brownouts and blackouts? And as you say, how can you fix it if you don't really know who's responsible? So what's sort of one key story or analogy from the book that could help people sort of understand how the policy grid differs from the physical power grid? I think you touch on it a little bit there, where you have these different sort of bureaucratic organizations that have to do approvals and whatnot. So what's the difference between this policy grid from the physical power grid?
Well, I make that as a very important point in the early part of the book, because the policy grid is the rules and regulations and payment choices that determine what's on the grid. But the physical grid is stuff that you could see out your window or walk over to or whatever. So, for example, the dispatch center for the different power plants, the balancing authority, is part of the physical grid, because it's a bunch of people sitting in a room keeping the grid going. But the policy grid is things like net metering. Are we going to have net metering? How much are we going to pay for people to put their home photovoltaic power on the grid? What is the payment scheme? Does that payment scheme hurt anybody? Does it hurt real power, regular power plants? I shouldn't say real. I mean, the photovoltaics are real, but the policy grid is where most of the problems are. When you get right down to it, if you're looking at the physical grid, it's pretty well understood. I mean, electromagnetics and so forth. People have been electrical engineers for decades. I mean, we get it. We know what it takes.
So it's really the policy side that has sort of put up all of these different, I wouldn't say roadblocks, but obstacles in the way that affect the grid.
Yes. Yes, that is correct. The policy grid really runs the physical grid to the point that people don't even necessarily remember there's a physical grid. So, for example, at one point, when Vermont Yankee Power Plant was had its license was about to be renewed, and the local utilities didn't buy power from it on defined power purchase agreements, because they thought, well, maybe its license won't be renewed, whatever. Then what was happening is that people in Vermont who were against it said, see, we don't need it. We don't even get power from it. And they got the same amount of power that they ever did. Who gets paid and when gets paid, they get paid doesn't really affect what is happening on the lines unless there's a change in what plants are dispatched or whatever. In other words, you have to change something on the physical grid to change what happens on the lines. But you can change things in the policy grid, and it doesn't necessarily affect the lines. I don't know how to describe that better. I spend a lot of time on it in the book. Let's just say that Vermont Yankee was still putting the same number of megawatts on the grid the day that the utilities weren't buying from it directly, because it was putting the megawatts on the grid and they were going into the market, and then utilities would buy from the market to make up what they weren't getting from Vermont Yankee. But of course, they were now getting it from Vermont Yankee through the market,
Oh my
but
gosh.
that's not something that you can say in two sentences. I mean, I may have said it in two sentences, but I mean, it's a complicated thing. Then somebody's going to say, so what's this market? And I'm like, well, it's the auctions. Okay. And then I go on to, why don't you ask me a different question?
Okay, so I love the description of your core elements of the grid near the beginning of the book. And I'm just going to read them out here. You had 3 core elements. Number 1 was reliability, or reliable electricity. Then number 2 was relatively inexpensive electricity so that everyone can use it to be healthy and happy. And then the third one was electricity made with low levels of pollution and minimal ecosystem disruption. And, when you have those 3 cores, you argue if you move away from that core or those goals, that's how the grid becomes more fragile. So, can you maybe highlight how this has happened today? Where to me, it seems like that there was this shift from where you had the sort of a regulated monopoly where you had the utilities that could do long-term planning, where there was a set amount of how much people would pay, and it was sort of vertically integrated utilities. But now we seem to be in this deregulated, I put deregulated market, and that model seems to operate differently. And so do you think that the differences between what used to be and what is now has caused this fragility and instability?
Well, it's caused a lot of it. I mean, the fragility and instability is caused by, the number one thing on my list was reliability. And there's no real organization in the multi-layers of the grid governance that is like, reliability is our thing. I mean, it's not that the way it is. Now, you understand that when they do dispatch, they do their very best to continue to have reliability. And so the people in the control room are concerned with reliability. But the people who are setting up which power plants are on the grid, how they get paid, whether or not, they're allowed to make electricity. So, for example, let's look at a typical cold weather scene in the Northeast in America. So we have here that the natural gas pipelines cannot supply in the cold weather both the homes that are depending on natural gas and the power plants that are depending on natural gas. And the reason is that the homes are using a lot, and the power plants, we used to have more nuclear plants, we used to have more coal plants and so forth. And those plants are not as, they're not on the grid as much. And so the natural gas plants are are taking up the slack. So now we have grids that are over 50% natural gas all year. In other words, if you look at what fuels they use, including renewables, for the course of a year, 50% of the fuel is natural gas. So if you've got the homes siphoning off the natural gas because they have priority, then you don't have natural gas enough for power plants. So what do you do about that? You do that. One of the things people do is they have what's called dual fuel plants. There are lots of them, and what those plants can do is they can burn natural gas or they can burn oil, so the dual fuel plants begin burning oil, and they end up. For example, frequently, I had some posts about this on X or whatever, 35% oil on the grid. The New England grid can be running on 35% oil because it can't get enough natural gas. So then, of course, we've got other places that have laws which say you cannot use so much oil because it's more polluting. So fine. Meanwhile, the governor of the state says, I'm striking that law during this emergency. So I'm saying, you see how complicated and ridiculous it gets. With nobody is really responsible for reliability. They treat reliability as something we're going to have to change something about because this is an emergency. They don't plan for what's happening.
Yeah, it's like they do an exemption. The law's still there, right? They didn't repeal the law. So the law's still there. And all they did is create an exemption for an emergency, where it's like, clearly you need all this stuff when there is an emergency. So maybe the law should be repealed. Maybe there's something wrong with the law.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, there is something wrong with the law. Now, I'm not in favor of using polluting fuels if you can use a less polluting fuel, but the idea that it takes the governor to allow you to burn some oil. I mean, I'm sorry, that isn't the way you keep a grid going.
Yeah, because it puts that power into the hands of somebody who may not understand it, and then you get all these problems and issues happening. So one of the interesting things that I know you wanted to talk about was this idea of dispatchable baseload power. And so it seems like if everything is reliant upon natural gas, which it's difficult to get, and the nuclear's been shut down and the coal's been shut down, what is compensating for the baseload power if there's not enough natural gas besides oil?
Well, nuclear is very good at it, but we haven't been building nuclear. So nuclear has been a shrinking portion of the fuel on the grid because we haven't been building nuclear plants. We've been shutting them down. Now someone will say, oh, we have wind and solar. Well, they are substituting for natural gas some of the time, and that's great. But they aren't substituting when the chips are down. So what I mean by that is that somebody got really mad at me for this. I said, the trouble with solar is it has a system-wide failure once a day, every day. And they said, no, it's not a system-wide failure. I said, what do you call sunset?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to get solar after sunset. You say, well, you can have a battery. So you're charging the battery with solar. Okay, great. If you can do it, it's super. But when you get right down to it, sometimes you need all the solar during the day for power, not charging a battery. I mean, in other words, pretty soon you have to have enough solar for peak use during the day and for charging a battery. I mean, so pretty soon you've got, twice as much solar as you might have thought you needed. Anyway, it just, it just gets to be a spiral of confusion. And when you get right down to it, natural gas it backs up solar. At night, you have more natural gas on the grid, usually.
Right. And I think one of the things you talk about in your book is how one of the problems with natural gas is it's sort of the just in time
Yeah.
sort of fuel source rather than something that you can have stockpiled. Like nuclear is always going. If you have a coal power plant, you can stockpile the coal. I mean, it is possible to stockpile the natural gas, but I think that's expensive, and they probably just rely more upon the pipeline connections. Is that
Oh,
correct?
yeah, they rely mostly on the pipeline connection. I mean, if you think about it, condensing natural gas takes energy, and then you have to uncondense it. In other words, if you want it as a liquid or a semi-liquid, you're going to have to make it that way because it wants to be a gas. So you have to refrigerate it. Okay, so that
Yeah.
your refrigerator takes energy, and refrigerating natural gas takes energy. So yeah, that's one of the problems with natural gas is this just in time thing. And when you add natural gas as just in time to wind, which is going on and off when it wants to, not because the dispatcher says, I need more wind, turn it on. Well, if you have a lot of wind, he could be able to turn some on. But if you're having a high pressure area or during the summer and weather is very still and very
Yeah.
hot, you're not going to be able to turn on the wind because you need it. But you can turn on natural gas, probably.
Yeah, we found that in the UK in the past, like we're experiencing a streak of hot temperatures here in the UK, and it's been really calm and still. And they've had to be drawing upon the interconnections with France
Oh,
and having to get EU permission to import more above the EU has set a limit on how much electricity can be exported to the UK, and we've had to call the EU to ask permission to exceed that limit. And we're getting it from France, which is nuclear, right?
yes.
So,
Right, 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 right.
yeah.
But
So,
that's the sort of thing that people make the rules. Okay, they make these laws. They say, well, we're not gonna build new nuclear, or we're gonna shut down all the coal plants, or we're gonna depend on the wind and batteries. And then when push comes to shove, and the wind isn't there because it's still, and you can't charge enough batteries to make up the lack, then you find yourself facing the fact that if the power goes out, people will be mad. Well, people will also possibly die and so forth. But people will be very angry, and they'll say, look at their politicians and say, "What are you doing to me?" So the politicians are then going to balance the ultra green groups who are saying, "Okay, fine. We don't need power all the time. Who needs it all the time?" And the consumers who are saying, I don't think you understand my situation here. I need power all the time. I have a sick relative who's using an oxygen thing. I have little kids that are running around on the floor, and I need to keep them warm. And so you're going to have, so the politician sitting there thinking, who's going to be more angry at me if I do this? That isn't the best way to run a grid with trying to figure out people's emotions. I mean, it's hard enough to run a grid with just figuring out things like availability of the different power plants, and some have gone down for repairs, and others may have some difficulties getting fuel because you can't. Well, various reasons for difficulties getting fuel, but what I'm trying to say is keeping all that stuff going is enough of work without adding, let's ask the governor and if he'll allow this, or let's ask the EU if they'll allow that.
I know, especially like when things are, you're at a millisecond away from a blackout or something, and you have to wait on these permissions. It's not the right way to run a grid.
No, it
Um, so, what's one common misconception that you think people have about how the grid actually works that you wish more people understood?
I wish more people understood that the grid is a big system that's miraculously in balance all the time. And it's not a miracle, it's because people are working hard to understand which power plants are available, what the likely demand will be in the next hour, in the next day, in the next 5 minutes, and keep everything in balance. Because if you have more people using electricity than you can supply, then the grid will have problems. And the frequency may change, and you may have brownouts and so forth. And so there are people who are working constantly to keep everything in balance. In the balancing authority control rooms. That's what they're called, the balancing authority.
Balancing
And
authority.
I think people need to know that electricity isn't something you can store up very easily. The only really effective way for storing electricity is to have fuel on site. And that includes coal, it includes nuclear. Nuclear, generally, the nuclear plants refuel every 18 months or so. And they refuel only when they refuel in the spring and in the fall, because that's when the demand on the grid is low, so they can go offline without hurting the grid. But because demand is low. But if they decided they were going to refuel in a cold snap in December, which they would never do, it would be really bad. And people need to know that there's this whole infrastructure of keeping everything in balance that includes nuclear plants that only refuel in the spring or the fall. It includes coal plants with coal on site. It includes oil deliveries to dual fuel plants. It includes a lot of people working around the clock, real time, keeping it in balance. And people don't understand that. They say, well, no, I mean, I flip the switch, the lights go on, of course. There's no of course about it.
Yes, I think we take that for granted here in the West. When my daughter was younger, she read this book about Malala from Pakistan.
Oh, yes.
And at the end of the book, she had this amazing little section where they're in England and their first time in a house where they could just turn the switch and the power was there, where they didn't have to wait for a generator or hope that there would be enough, for the community. And my daughter's like, really? Well, I can't believe that's such a thing. And I'm like, yes, we take it for granted that it's there when we need it 24/7, and as it should be. But I always thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And sometimes I think that more people should read books like that or visit areas where that is the case. And then they'd have a more understanding of how important it is to keep the grid at a steady level all the time for safety and for health and for, anything you want to do, really.
Right.
The grid, the electricity can be used for trivial purposes that people consider trivial, but most of it is used for purposes that are not trivial. At least that's my opinion. And I think that's pretty much the way it is. As Malala said, wow, I turn it on. It's great.
It's there. I just flick a switch and wow, it's amazing. I think to the situation in Spain last year where they had the huge load of solar, and I'd spoken with Catherine Porter, and she had a very good assessment of what happened there, not enough spinning things. And um, it was France was fortunate that they were able to sort of cut it off before it created this cascade effect across France. So, what are the risks of putting so much renewable wind and solar onto the grid? Could that happen in the United States where there's just too much on there?
Well, it could, but hopefully we're not going to let it happen. I don't know. One of the things is that I wrote a blog post called The Switches in Spain. And the reason I wrote that post is that people don't understand that if you have a photovoltaic array or a wind array, it makes direct current. You say, well, the windmill's spinning, but it's spinning at whatever speed it wants to spin. So it has to be converted to direct current and then converted to AC current, and it can't. And the conversion to AC is kind of a set of switches. Now, if you have a I don't know, a car, and you take your foot off the brake and off the gas, the car will keep going because it's got momentum. If you have a switch in the house to turn on your light, you turn it off, the light's off. It's not going to keep going because there's no momentum behind that switch. Now, of course, you like the fact that the light goes off and the light goes on very quickly, but you don't really want that in a big grid. I mean, you really want some ability to ride through some kind of impermanent short-term problem. I mean, being able to ride through a short problem is just an essential feature of the grid, and it isn't very well done with the switches that are they're pretending to be sine waves. I mean, they aren't sine waves; they're switches.
Yeah. Which then causes all the problem. So I just want to pivot a little bit here. There's the introduction of data centers and AI and rising electricity demand from other electrification policies like EVs, heat pumps. But the data centers are seeming to get all the blame for the current pressures on the grid. In your view, how much of these new demands are creating problems versus exacerbating the fragility that was already there?
They're just exacerbating it. I mean, if we had tons of data centers all over the place, then you might say, oh, this is the problem. And of course, in some areas like Northern Virginia, where there are a lot of data centers this can be the problem. But most of the time, the data centers aren't the problem. The problem is that the grid is fragile before the data centers show up. I mean, and despite the fact that the grid is fragile, that people keep trying to make it more fragile. What I mean by that is that they want to shut down any fossil plant, or they want to they want to electrify transportation, so all our cars will be plugged in, and so they're adding to demand while shutting down supply, and that isn't a good scene for a reliable grid. I want to also say something, and then I chose the word fragile very carefully because fragile means it breaks easily. You see, it doesn't mean it's broken. It doesn't mean it's sure to break. It means it breaks easily. So, for example, the California grid has been fragile in the sense that they have had to tell people to shut off all their equipment and stuff like that on a warm night. Okay? Now, warm nights happen. So it isn't like people have lost their grid power because there's a Category 5 hurricane coming ashore. No, it's just like it's summer and there's a warm night happening. So that's fragility. I keep saying that I have a water bottle here. It's made of some kind of plastic. I don't know. I should look it up. But at any rate, it's a water bottle, and it would be really hard for me to crush this water bottle. But if I would decided that I wanted to drink water from carefully made, expensive stemware, that wine glasses, it would be pretty easy to break them. That's fragility, and the grid is becoming more fragile.
So what do you think the solution is to prevent the ongoing fragility of the grid? I know that the United States has different regional areas. There's different sort of grid networks. So there's PJM, then there's ENSO, and then there's the Texas one. So what do you think the solution is in general?
I think the solution is that each area should be capable of taking care of itself, even in um, uh, difficult circumstances. So dependency on the neighbors is not a good scene, because the neighbors will be having the same weather probably that you're having. So we find ourselves with the neighbors in Canada. I wrote a whole blog post saying, don't look north, because Canada doesn't always want to export to us when they're having troubles. They're not,
Yeah.
we can't just say, well, you owe it to us. Why do they owe it to us? They built the power plants. They have people there that need power. So I guess the thing is that I would like to see the following. If I had a perfect grid, okay, I would say we should accept that baseload power is really an important percentage of the power that's on the grid. And the baseload power, I've seen studies, and for example, in New York State, all over New York State, not just in New York City, the city that never sleeps, etc., 60% of the power that's used in the state is a power that's on 24/7. So it is what's called the base load. It's what rarely goes below that amount, okay, 60%. So what we should do is we should have nuclear plants that provide the base load power. Then, even with our current infrastructure of natural gas and so forth, we could probably do the 40% load following with natural gas, with hydro, and so forth, without really getting into a lot of trouble. There's a whole bunch of people who say, "Oh, base load is your grandpa's grid." No, base load is there all the time. That's what it's called. It's the demand that's on the grid 24/7. And if we meet that demand with power plants that are set up to run 24/7, then we have a lot more flexibility about the rest of the grid. But if we're meeting all the demand with flexible natural gas, or 60% of the demand or 50% of the demand with flexible natural gas, then we're going to end up with problems supplying that amount of natural gas through pipelines when there's high demand.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point about the base load. And I find it shocking that people would say, well, that's an old way. It's like, it's the correct way. Just because something's old doesn't mean it's not the right way to do something.
Well, they say, well, we just need like more wind turbines or something. Well, no, the wind isn't reliable enough to be base load without some support. So what you want is you end up supporting it with natural gas. Okay, you really need something that doesn't need the natural gas's support, because you want the natural gas there to be load following, to
Yeah.
see, when the demand on the grid goes up, we fire up a natural gas plant, which takes just a few minutes to fire up, and we can see how the load is going, so we know what we're doing, and so forth and so on.
So I know one of the things that you emphasize in your writings, on your blog and in your book, is that it's really important to have sort of diversity of supply. So it's not just natural gas, it's not just wind, it's not just solar,
And
but that there's nuclear there. And I mean, what about coal? Do you think coal with the clean coal technology would be is that something that could be acceptable if it has low particulates and low emissions?
let me just say that coal, there are two types of problems with coal. The first is that coal uh, used to be really a dirty fuel. I grew up in Chicago in the old days. I'm 80, and everything burned coal. The power plants burned coal. The the apartment buildings burned coal. Everything burned coal, and it was really ghastly. I mean, I remember I was about 7 years old, and there was a killer smog in Britain because of the coal. And I asked my mom, and she says, "Yeah, that could happen here. Yeah, yeah, could happen." I mean, I thought, good Lord. And one of the great hopes of nuclear for Chicago was to get away from the threat of a temperature inversion, where the high temperatures are not, well, anyway, where the lid is kept on the emissions because of the different levels of temperature as you go up. Anyway, what I'm saying is that was the problem in Britain. And to be honest, it was just luck that we didn't have a problem like that in Chicago. I mean, it was just luck. I mean, Britain is surrounded by water, which is usually got more wind than land does. And Chicago is right next to Lake Michigan, and it's called the Windy City. But neither of those are guarantees that we won't, that coal problems won't be trapped that way. Now, what was being trapped? It was particulate, it was nitrogen oxide, it was sulfur dioxide. Those are the things that were being trapped and causing the deaths in Britain. And I think that's pretty well known and well reported upon. And they could have done the same thing in Chicago, but thank God they didn't. I might not be here to tell you about it. But one of the things about that is that I was working on pollution control when I first began working on in the utilities. I was with a contractor who was working on pollution control for utilities. Not I wasn't working directly for a utility. I was working for a contractor who had a specialty in cleaning up nitrogen oxide pollution. And I'm going to say that we have really done an amazing job of cleaning coal against sulfur dioxide, particulate, and nitrogen oxide reduction pollution. Okay, and to me, those are the biggies. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, somebody will say, "Oh, but coal will still make a lot of carbon dioxide, and we have to capture it." Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Carbon dioxide is not directly killing people. It may be changing the climate, which is a longer term thing. So my feeling is keep using the coal plants until you can use cleaner nuclear plants. I mean, people don't realize that there are two separate problems with coal. One, traditional pollution, the stuff that makes the sky gray that leads to coughing and people being hospitalized in London and in Chicago. That's traditional pollution, and we're pretty good at cleaning it up now. But carbon dioxide emissions are now considered pollution. And I think, okay, I'm not going to argue about how polluting they are, how much effect they have on people's everyday life. I don't want to argue about that particularly because I'm not a chemist, an atmospheric chemist. I'm a kind of person who looks at, combustion and metals and corrosion. I mean, it's a whole different thing dealing with the atmosphere. But we really have to look at the trade-offs. In other words, if we shut down every coal plant and we don't have enough electricity, that isn't a good trade-off because the cleaned up coal plants just don't have that much effect on people's daily life or health. What I mean by that is coal plants with nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate control,
Yeah.
they're not what they used to be. And I'm really glad of it because, I mean, I don't think our kids, my kids, for example, have any idea what growing up in a coal city was like. I mean, I remember when I moved to a different area of the country where they didn't burn coal, and actually, I remember thinking, whoa, look at this. You don't have to wipe off your windowsills every day.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, this is clean. I mean, there was grease on the windowsill every second day. You had to wipe them off.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out the trade-offs because you're absolutely right. I think the technology is really advanced. You're probably involved with it being able to scrub the particulates out of the stack so that it doesn't go into the atmosphere. And I know that China has been implementing a lot of that in their new coal power plants where they have it be the sort of lowest particulate matter emissions possible kind of thing, which is why they're arguing, yes, we can build coal because we're building clean coal. And if China can do that, why can't
Well,
the
we
rest
can
of
too.
we can too. We can too.
We have
Um,
technology.
yeah. So why not do that, right? I know it's a little more expensive, but you get reliability. There's the trade-off where you get the baseload power. America has a lot of really great coal that can be used for that. So does Canada, so does the UK. But the UK has shut down all of its coal plants. They blew them up, so you can't even like reopen them.
You know what
So
shocked me? The UK flooded its coal mines.
yeah, that
Flooded a
too.
lot of its coal mines. Now, my husband's family comes from Cornwall, and they're
Oh,
traditional miners. I mean,
yeah.
now they're hard rock miners, not coal miners, okay? But there's a whole mining thing that happens. I mean, miners, well, anyway, long and short of it is the one of the things that Cornwall pioneered the Cornish mines was dewatering mines and pumping mines and so forth. So when I was reading that Britain was flooding mines, I was like, are these people crazy? Are they
Yeah,
crazy?
it's like burning the bridges or the burning the boats after landing, it's that
Yeah.
kind of mentality. Um, to pivot again now, when we talk about how to make the grid more efficient, more reliable, there's a big push right now about virtual power plants, and you discuss them in your book very well. And I'm wondering if you can just take a moment to sort of define or explain for the audience what are these so-called virtual power plants. What are they? What do they use them for? How are they being marketed? And in your experience, how well do they actually deliver on their promises compared to traditional resources?
Uh, well, they don't deliver all that well, but I mean, Well, let me look at it. What is a virtual power plant? A virtual power plant is a power plant that doesn't exist in one place. In other words, if I want to show you a coal plant, we can drive over somewhere and see a coal plant or a natural gas plant. But if you want to see a virtual power plant, it's not so easy because it exists as a conglomeration of something. And what is the something? The something could be photovoltaics on home roofs, so that during the day the home roofs are the equivalent of a power plant. They're putting that much power on the grid. Or it could be demand response. In other words, we don't have to build a power plant because we're going to ask people to use electricity. They'll use less electricity. We'll ask them to use less, and it'll be fine because we don't need that to build a power plant. We've got a virtual power plant by asking people to use less electricity. This is good for peak shaving, but when you get right down to it, a peak is just a short-term thing. If you're actually looking to use virtual power plants to make people use less electricity, you have to ask, what are the trade-offs? What is happening in this person's home? What has happened to this person's business if they have to turn off their electricity for a significant amount of time? And I think that they're oversold. They're oversold in the sense that when you get right down to it, they're not available all the time. They're not real power plants. They're sort of like encouraging people to conserve, to use less, to do without. Now, I find the whole idea that the power company wants you to do without is a little weird. The power company's in charge of supplying you with their product, and encouraging you to do without and calling that a virtual power plant isn't really that great. I want to go back to a period of time where I was looking at what was going on the New England grid and at various things with Vermont Yankee and so forth. And at that point, the New England grid was happy to pay people for not using power. So they were they were paying for virtual power plants.
Yeah.
And they got very few people bidding to supply them with a virtual power plant, because most businesses don't want to shut off. Because imagine if you're a simple business, you have a shop at a mall, and you're going to shut off your power, or you're going to have to shut down your shop. You're going to,
Yeah.
So how much are they going to have to pay you to shut down your shop for a couple hours on a hot day?
Yeah.
Well, you could expect usually that people would go to the mall to be somewhere cool on a hot day. Maybe they'd come into your shop and buy whatever you're selling. And then you say, well, no, we're going to make you part of a virtual power plant here. And so it turned out that they offered money to demand response money, and it turned out that there was, I should look this up. I wrote about it. They got like 5% of of demand response, compared to 40% of people who were willing to supply them with some more power from, running their power plant more for more money.
Yeah, they did something similar in the UK in 2022 when Russia attacked Ukraine, and there was the big, when they blew up Nord Stream and there wasn't enough natural gas. And so they went to the public and said, "Please sign up for demand response
Yes.
and we'll pay you not to turn your heat on and everything else." And there was an article in the newspaper where they went afterwards and asked people what they thought of it. And there were people saying, "I froze and I got, 20p or 2 pounds or something like that to freeze in my house. This is not a good idea." And so people were like, we didn't get enough to justify the amount of inconvenience and discomfort that the demand control created. So it's like, you're right. How much are you going to pay somebody? Because I don't think people understand. They might think, "Oh, gee, my power bill's really high," but when you actually shut off for a couple of hours, it's not that much. So your life is significantly inconvenienced for what? Because they didn't add enough base load and dispatchable power onto the grid.
Now, what they're doing in a way is they're kind of exploiting the average person, because if you were to go to a big company and you say, "Hi, Mr. Baker, I know that you're making tons of loaves and sending them out all over the southern Britain, and I know that's your business, but we want you to not use power for 4 hours on a certain day, every day, or whatever." The baker would say, "You can't pay me enough for that." I mean,
Right?
the whole system is set up to keep things moving through. I mean, I can't just shut things off. I mean, then there'll be yeasty bread rising over here that'll just overrise because there's nowhere to knead it and put it into a pan and bake it. I mean, you guys are crazy. I'm not doing it. And so the thing is that what they would have to pay a business, whether it's a shop in a mall or a baker or any business, to be willing to do demand response, is a lot of money. So what they do is they know that uh, uh, individuals, they just want to be good citizens. They want to
Yeah.
do their part, and so you
Yeah.
don't have to pay them as much.
You're right. That is exploiting people, their goodwill, their good nature to help out in a crisis. But when every day is a crisis.
That's right. That's the thing I say. That's why I chose the word fragile. If every day is a crisis, you've got a fragile situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Which seems to be where we're going. And one of the interesting things is I think it was a company called Voltus signed an agreement with one of the big tech companies to say, we'll provide you energy, bring your own capacity by using virtual power plants. And what they're doing is they're tapping into the client list of Octopus Energy, which operates in that jurisdiction. And what I don't know, and I haven't been able to find it, did people sign up for that? When they joined Octopus, we're having green energy or whatever, did they sign up in the fine print to be used as a demand response mechanism for a virtual power plant? Are people aware? Because they're trying to say that they'll be able to provide enough energy to the data center that this big tech company is building from this distributed virtual power plant. And I'm not convinced that they'll be able to do that. It's like they're going to be juggling things. And so one of the elements that I'm concerned about with the trade-offs is privacy. So if you give them access to all the different smart devices in your home, whether it's your thermostat, your fridge, your stove, whatever's connected, if you have these connected appliances, then that allows the utility companies to turn things off and on or turn them down or whatever. And then it can also monitor your usage.
Yes.
So, and then what are they doing with that data? Now, right now they might say, "Oh, well, we're not doing anything. It's all aggregated or whatever." But it doesn't take much of a stretch to think that that can be used later for something else where It's shifting the burden onto individual. Be like, why are you using so much energy? It's like, then you got to justify, well, I have an elderly person I'm looking after and they have an oxygen machine, and I have, as you've said before, I have children, I need to make sure that the household is warm or cool enough for them, and so on. But then it starts questioning your behavior. Why
Oh,
are you? So
I've seen this already to some extent. Okay, and this was just in my case, but it got me really angry. Our local utility company sent a bill, and it circled a certain weekend and said, "You used a lot of electricity that weekend. Can you look at how you could cut back?" And I'm like, "Why do you? I mean, what are you asking me to do?" It turned out that what happened that weekend is that both my kids came back from summer camp with loads and loads of dirty clothes, and they were heading out to visit some friends within a few days. They had been invited to a friend's house, different friends' houses, two different kids, and they were. I had to get all the clothes clean so they could leave again. And I mean, yeah, I was running the washing machine nonstop and the dryer. And I don't want the power company telling me, "Oh, have you thought of how you could cut back?" No, I can't cut back. I mean, even if I wanted to hang clothes outside, I wouldn't be able to hang enough clothes outside for this little mini crisis of getting clean clothes at my house.
yeah, like, that's shocking. I'm shocked, not shocked that they would send that. What's your usage like? You're using too much. Can you think about how to cut back? Did you reply and say, please add more base load?
I, I
What are
just
you doing?
I just was really kind of, one of the things is that I study the grid and I know issues and I know people's responses and I do all this stuff. And I tend to be very concerned with safety, but not particularly conspiracy theorists. So if people say, "Oh, they're controlling my thermostat or whatever," I'm like, "Yeah, well, they're probably not that bad." But all of a sudden, I realized viscerally just how angry I got at people telling me that I was running my washing machine, basically saying I was running my washing machine and dryer too much one weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just one thing, right? And I think it could end up being more. At least I know in the UK, because the grid is incredibly fragile, that I they're having trouble getting everyone to do a smart meter anyway, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, they put smart meters on everybody's house in Vermont. I mean, that's what they did, and you have to pay extra if they don't put a smart meter on your house. So,
Oh, interesting.
so yeah, so you can opt out if you're willing to pay extra. I mean, I don't live in Vermont anymore. We moved down to be closer to the kids in New Jersey and New York. But I loved Vermont. I loved everything about it except its energy policy.
So as we wrap up, if we're looking ahead, what gives you hope for a more reliable grid in your area, and what practical steps would you recommend to people who want to get involved or would like to advocate for better outcomes?
I think that one of the things is that people, wherever you are, you should try to find out what is actually happening on your grid. For example, PJM, most grid operators publish their what they call their resource mix, so you can find out if your grid is burning a lot of coal or whatever. I mean, I think you have to start from a place of knowledge, and then even doing small things can have a big effect. So if you write a letter to the editor saying, "Do you realize that our supposedly clean grid was 40% coal last week?" You know, why aren't people building more nuclear plants, or why, or or for example, just go to the Public Utilities Commission hearings if you have them. They're open to the public usually. They have hearings that are open to the public. I'm sorry to say that the RTOs uh, only have like one hearing a year that's open to the public. I mean, but the old line utilities, their Public Utilities Commission's meetings are open to the public. So you can go there and you can comment on what's going on. And, you know, and then, you could read blogs. Of course, I want you to read my book, Shorting the Grid, and I'll wave it around here. Okay. I also think you can read blogs. There are blogs, probably blogs that are specific to your area. For example, when I lived in Vermont, I had a blog called Yes Vermont Yankee, and there are blogs. There are blogs on Canadian energy issues. You can follow Catherine Porter's. It's a blog. It's not a Substack. It's a regular blog. Catherine Porter is just absolutely on track about what goes on in Great Britain. I mean, so educate yourself and express yourself. Educate yourself by reading blogs and your grid operator's website, and express yourself both in letters to the editor and in PUC meetings. I mean, that would be we don't have much power. We individual retail customers, we don't. But we have to use the power we have.
That's excellent points there, and I hope people listen and take your advice. Where can people find you? You're writing on Substack now, aren't you?
Yes, I am. It's it says here Meredith, and it should say Meredith Angwin, but it's my fault because I didn't put the Angwin in. Yeah, you can find Meredith Angwin on Substack, and I'm also the electric grandma on Substack. I do have 4 grandchildren. It up, and so the electric grandma on Substack. I also, if you're on X, I'm often posting little tiny things on X like, oh, who would have guessed this would happen, sort of thing. And people have told me that they're interesting and valuable. So I'm hoping that they are. I tend to think of them as just kind of, compared to writing a book, a post on X is pretty minor. And I guess that's it. Follow me on Substack, buy the book, follow your local PUC, write letters to them, or comment on websites, and that's what we can do.
That's awesome. I have one last question for you before we go. Are you optimistic about the sort of resurgence of nuclear in the United States? There seems to be a lot of positive developments. Are you optimistic that will actually turn into physical new power plants being built?
I'm reasonably optimistic about it. The problem is that the United States has had a hard time building anything because we have so many regulations and so forth. So I think nuclear is partially caught into that problem. I mean, I hate to think of what it would cost to build the countrywide highway system right now. We put in a lot of freeways, and we did that in the 50s and 60s. I don't know if we could afford to do it now. There's so many regulations. But I am optimistic because, let's face it, the words, the rhetoric about how green we have to be, how we have to have 100% renewables, it's running head on into the reality of what people need. And people will not usually by rhetoric, when they need something, they will try to make sure that their needs are met. And that's my hope, is that people will realize that getting reliable electricity is not just the job of the different green organizations. It's everybody's job to make sure that the green organizations don't shut down electricity that people need. Now they're not trying to, I sound like I'm really down on green. I mean, I was a member of the Sierra Club way back. I dropped it recently, relatively recently, when I realized that they were going anti-nuclear. But I mean, I don't know. I think that I am hopeful about it. I'm hopeful about it. And I think that my hopefulness will survive everybody's like, well, what if Trump isn't elected? He's been pro energy, okay? And what if he isn't elected the next time? What if a Democrat is elected and we find ourselves, trying to be green again, 100% green? I don't think it's going to go back to 100% green as a goal. I think people are more aware of the trade-offs because different areas of the world have run head on into the wall of like, oh, there isn't enough for safety here. There isn't enough for comfort here. There isn't enough for our industry here. Looking at you, Germany.
And Germany.
Germany was the leader of industry in Europe. And it just kind of decided it was going to destroy its energy infrastructure for some reason. I mean, sometimes there's an old saying, who the gods would destroy, they first made insane. And sometimes I look at Germany and say, I guess the gods wanted to destroy you because you're insane.
Yeah, for sure. Germany is a basket case. There's so many industries that have left. And the UK is the same thing. I don't know how many industries are left here anymore. The steel ones, they bailed out, they nationalized it, but it's really making no difference. So when energy prices are that expensive, you lose your industry because they'll go to where it's more affordable.
Yeah. So, but I am hopeful that people are beginning to notice that this is a phenomenon that happens and that it's best to have inexpensive energy, clean, reliable energy, inexpensive energy that can be used for businesses, and clean energy. But clean energy is not any good to you if it's not reliable and affordable.
That's right. Well, thank you. We'll end it there. I appreciate your time, Meredith, the Electrogramma. I'll have links to your Substack and X handle in the description, as well as a link to your book. I think everybody should buy it. It's a fantastic book, and I really appreciate you. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.